Preparation for Reparations podcast. Yɛresiesie Yɛn. Episode 3. The Power of Testimony. Documenting our experiences for reparatory justice. Welcome to the third episode of the Preparation for Reparations podcast. Yɛresiesie Yɛn. I'm your host, Esther Xosei. For those new to our journey, Yɛresiesie Yɛn is a powerful phrase from our Akan ancestors, meaning we are preparing ourselves. It reminds us that reparations isn't something passively received, it's something that we actively create through our own preparation and strengthening. In our first episode, we explored how preparation is power, how actively strengthening ourselves creates the conditions for justice. In our second episode, we discussed Maatzoedzaduaras, our Maat action learning circles, as practical tools for community-led reparations work. Today, we'll explore the power of testimony and how documenting our experiences creates powerful evidence for reparatory justice. Before we begin, however, let us pour libation to honour our ancestors and ancestresses and set our intentions. We pour libation to the Creator, source of wisdom and justice, to Mother Earth who holds our stories, to our African ancestresses and ancestors who prepared the way, whose blood flows through our veins, whose wisdom guides our steps, whose struggles light our path. May our words honour their sacrifices. May our works advance our struggle for full repair. The planet repairs. Ashe, Ashe, Asheo. The power of documentation in reparation struggles. In a world where powerful interests continuously attempt to erase, minimize, or distort the history of the Maangamizi, documentation becomes not only important but revolutionary. When we document our stories, preserve evidence, and tell our truths, we engage in acts of resistance against the systemic erasure of our experiences. Our testimonies assert that our lived realities matter and must be acknowledged. Documentation serves multiple essential functions in our reparation struggle. First, it creates an undeniable record of harm. When we meticulously document the specific injuries inflicted upon our families and communities, whether land theft, forced displacement, cultural destruction, or physical violence, we make it impossible for perpetrators to claim ignorance or deny responsibility. Second, documentation establishes continuity between past injustices and present inequalities. By tracing how historical harms continue to manifest in contemporary disparities, we challenge the notion that these injustices are over and demonstrate the ongoing need for repair. Third, our documentation reclaims narrative power. When we document our stories in our own words, through our own perspectives, we challenge who gets to tell our story and how it is told. Narrative power determines which experiences are validated, which suffering is recognized, and which solutions are considered legitimate. By documenting our experiences, we disrupt the monopoly that academic institutions, government archives, and media outlets have maintained over how our stories are represented. We assert our right not only to be included in history, but to interpret it, to explain its causes and effects, and to determine what justice requires in response. Finally, documentation builds the evidentiary foundation for formal reparations claims. Whether through international legal mechanisms, national legislation, or direct negotiations, strong evidence strengthens our position and increases the likelihood of achieving meaningful redress. In Bristol, community-led documentation efforts have resulted in significant progress. The historic Bristol Reparations and Atonement motions passed by the City Council explicitly acknowledges the importance of community-driven approaches. This motion demonstrates how community documentation and advocacy can lead to formal recognition and commitments. Documentation is not an academic exercise. It's a practical necessity and an act of resistance. As powerful interests seek to minimize or dismiss our cause of reparatory justice, our documentation creates an infrastructure of truth that cannot easily be dismantled. Documentation as revolutionary praxis. What makes documentation revolutionary? As the writer and activist Audre Lorde reminds us, your silence will not protect you. Lorde's powerful words challenge us to understand that our survival depends on transforming silence into language and action, on speaking our truths, even when, especially when, they are difficult to articulate. When we bear witness to the Maangamizi, we are not merely recording past atrocities or present ones. We are engaging in a radical act of self-definition and collective empowerment. By articulating our experiences as witnesses, by naming the specific harms, identifying their perpetrators, and tracing their ongoing impacts, we transform our relationship to these experiences. We become witnesses whose testimony threatens the very foundations of systems built on our dehumanization and erasure. This is revolutionary in multiple ways. First, documentation challenges the monopoly on historical narrative held by those who have benefited from our oppression. When official histories minimize or erase the violence of enslavement and colonialism, our counter-archives create an alternative infrastructure of knowledge. Second, documentation creates a basis for collective consciousness and action. When we recognize that our individual experiences are part of wider structural patterns, we move beyond personal pain to political analysis. Third, documentation builds accountability infrastructures outside of official channels. When governmental and corporate actors deny responsibility for historical and ongoing harms of the Maangamizi, our evidence creates unavoidable records of accountability. Fourth, documentation preserves knowledge that sustains our communities through intergenerational trauma. By recording not only our suffering, but also our resilience, wisdom, and cultural practices, we ensure that future generations inherit tools for their own liberation. This revolutionary potential connects directly to the work of the All-Party Parliamentary Commission of Inquiry for Truth and Reparatory Justice, or the Maatzoedzaduaras, which is a campaign proposal of the Stop the Maangamizi campaign. The Maatzoedzaduaras will represent a formal mechanism through which our documentation can challenge institutional power, but its effectiveness will depend entirely on the quality, scope, and power of the evidence that we gather. Moreover, the very process of gathering evidence through Maatzoedzaduaras and other community structures builds independent political power that can ensure that the Maatzoedzaduaras will remain accountable to our communities rather than being co-opted by existing power structures. In short, documentation is revolutionary because it fundamentally alters power relations. It transforms silence into speech, invisibility into evidence, and isolated suffering into collective demands for justice. Becoming powerful witnesses, methods and approaches. To become effective witnesses to evidencing the Maangamizi, we need practical approaches to document our experiences. So let's explore different methods that transform our stories into powerful evidence. Personal testimonies and oral histories. Our spoken accounts represent the most direct and powerful form of witnessing. When recorded and preserved, these testimonies humanize statistics and bring historical realities to life through the authentic voice of experience. For those documenting their own stories or helping others to do so, begin with open-ended questions that invite full storytelling. Create a space where emotions can be expressed without judgment. Focus on specific details that bring the story to life, such as names, places, and any sensory memories. Document not just what happened, but how it affected you, your family, or your community. Include your resistance and survival strategies, how you or the affected persons maintained dignity and agency. And share the wisdom and understanding you've gained through these experiences. Remember, your personal testimony or that of any of your family members is not just a recounting of harm. It is a powerful act of witnessing that challenges official narratives and demands acknowledgement. Family and community histories. Our families hold crucial knowledge that connects past injustices to present conditions. Here, you may record conversations with elders about their experiences and memories. Document family displacement, land loss, or economic hardship across generations. Maybe preserve family photographs or letters, documents, and other artifacts. You may map family migrations and movements, noting the forces that caused these displacements. Maybe you will want to collect stories of cultural practices, traditions, and knowledge that have survived. These family histories, when connected with others, reveal patterns that might otherwise remain invisible in individual accounts. Now, still thinking about how we can become effective witnesses and some of the practical approaches that we can use to document our experiences, I want to say a little bit about creative documentation. Our communities have always used creative expression as a form of witnessing. Poetry, music, and storytelling that might document our experiences of injustice. Visual arts that represent historical and contemporary manifestations of the Maangamizi. Theatre and performance that embody and communicate our collective memories. How about digital storytelling that combines multiple media to create powerful testimonies, or even cultural rituals and practices that preserve memory through embodied knowledge? These creative forms often communicate truths that factual accounts alone cannot capture, speaking to the emotional and the spiritual dimensions of our experiences of surviving the Maangamizi. Another approach is about how we connect individual accounts to structural patterns. As witnesses, we must connect our individual experiences to larger patterns. And we can do this by documenting similar experiences across different families and communities, collecting evidence showing how policies affected multiple families and generations, recording the institutional actors and the systems responsible for harm, tracing how historical injustices continue to shape present conditions, identifying the common strategies of resistance and survival. Now, this connection between personal experience and structural analysis transforms our individual testimony into political understanding, which is a crucial step in building our own family people's case for reparations. Next, I'll say a few words about preserving and sharing our witness testimonies. Once documented, our witness testimonies must be preserved and shared. So you can do this, for instance, by creating secure digital and physical storage for testimonies and other types of evidence. Maybe sharing stories at community gatherings or producing publications. Connect with others doing similar documentation to build collective understanding. And it's important to ensure that younger generations have access to these testimonies. We can present this evidence in formats that can be used in formal reparations processes. So, for instance, in preparation for the Maatzoedzaduaras, the All-Party Parliamentary Commission of Inquiry for Truth and Reparatory Justice. Through these methods, we transform ourselves from isolated victims into powerful witnesses whose collective testimony creates an undeniable case for reparatory justice. Now, whilst we're busy documenting away, it's important to bear in mind that there are some ethical considerations that we need to factor in. And so we must pay attention to these ethical considerations So some of these ethical considerations are issues of consent and ownership, avoiding trauma and re-traumatization, issues to do with representation, and issues to do with security and protection. So starting off with consent and ownership. First and foremost, we must ensure that there is informed consent when we're gathering testimonies or other types of documentation. And we do so by clearly explaining how information will be used, being honest and discussing potential risks and benefits, or even concerns or even fears of any documentation and what it might mean for the individual or family or community members concerned. It's important that individuals know that they have the right to withdraw their consent at any time, and having a discussion and coming up with clear agreements about the material that gets collected, ownership of it, and how it will be utilized. So the question of who owns documented stories and evidence is critical. Too often, researchers and institutions have extracted knowledge from our communities without ensuring community benefit. So we have to be involved in creating clear protocols around this, and also any kind of usage rights that might help prevent any exploitation. Now saying a few words about trauma and re-traumatization. Documentation often involves recounting traumatic experiences. We must be mindful of the potential for re-traumatization. And this is important in ways that we ensure appropriate emotional support is available before, during, and after periods of documentation. That we become more sensitive to recognizing signs of distress and knowing when to pause or stop. That we allow participants to determine the boundaries around what they want to discuss and how they want to discuss it and in what format they want to discuss it. And that we also include questioning and documentation around resistance, survival, and healing strategies, not just the harm that we've experienced. Thinking next about representation and context. How we represent any evidence that we collect matters deeply. In this regard, it's important to provide adequate historical and structural content. It's important to avoid sensationalizing or exploiting pain and suffering. We need to ensure that people are portrayed with dignity and agency, not just as quote-unquote victims, and include stories of resistance alongside accounts of harm. Any kind of documentation that is happening, it's important for us to consider developing community review processes where those who share their stories can review and provide feedback on how they are represented in any documentation. And finally, thinking about security and protection, we should ensure that we assess potential risks to those providing testimony or other forms of evidence. We need to be thinking through how we develop appropriate security protocols, especially when sensitive information is shared or expressed. We need to think about how we create secure storage systems and appropriate backup procedures, and we need to consider when it might be appropriate or necessary to anonymize people's names and identities to protect them. By addressing these ethical considerations, we can ensure that our documentation ethics do not further harm while building the foundation for healing and transformation. The power of bearing witness. As the renowned Nigerian feminist writer Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie warns about the danger of a single story, she reminds us that power is the ability not just to tell the story of another person, but to make it the definitive story of that person. This profound insight speaks directly to why our testimonies matter. They challenge the single stories others have told about us. When we document our personal and collective experiences of the Maangamizi, we are not merely recording history. We are reclaiming our agency and power. The act of witnessing, of saying, I was there, this happened to me, to my family, to my community, to my ancestresses and ancestors, transforms us from passive objects of history into active subjects who shape the narrative and ultimately our futures. This active process of bearing witness is at the heart of what we mean by preparation for reparations. Yɛresiesie Yɛn. It's not about waiting for others to acknowledge our experiences or define what justice looks like. By documenting our testimonies, we are actively building the foundation upon which all reparatory justice claims must stand. Without our stories collected, analysed, and presented on our own terms, there can be no meaningful reparations. That is why we emphasise the Yɛresiesie Yɛn. We are preparing ourselves because reparations itself is a process. Our testimonies are not just evidence. They are the blueprint for the justice we seek to create. As witnesses, we are truth tellers. To witness is to testify to truth in the face of denial and erasure. Consider these dimensions of bearing witness. Personal testimony creates evidence that cannot be dismissed as mere statistics or abstractions. Intergenerational witnessing connects the experiences of elders to younger generations, ensuring that our memory persists and is not forgotten. Collective witnessing reveals patterns of harm that might seem isolated in individual accounts. And witnessing as resistance directly challenges official or state narratives that minimize or deny the injustices that we and our family members and other community members have faced. The power of witnessing lies in its authenticity and moral authority. When we document our lived experiences, whether through recorded oral histories, written testimonies, creative expressions, or even digital storytelling, we create evidence that carries a weight and resonance that academic analysis alone cannot achieve. Now, from individual stories to collective power. The true revolutionary potential emerges when individual acts of witnessing the Maangamizi connect to form a collective testimony. When our individual documentations join together, patterns emerge that reveal the systemic nature of the Maangamizi and its continuing impacts. This collection and connection of testimonies serves multiple purposes. It validates individual experiences by showing they are part of larger patterns. It builds solidarity among those who recognize their shared experiences. It creates compelling evidence that is difficult for power structures to dismiss. And it provides the raw material for developing specific, actionable demands for repair. By documenting our experiences and sharing them through the Maatzoedzaduaras and other community structures, we transform individual memory into collective power, creating an undeniable body of evidence that demands response and repair. Now sharing a few words about how connecting documentation to advocacy and action happens. Documentation becomes revolutionary when it flows through our own self-determined infrastructures for justice. That is why the Stop the Maangamizi campaign has developed a comprehensive pathway from ground-level documentation to global accountability. Let me be clear. Reparations will not fall like manna from the sky. Reparations will not be granted by benevolent governments or institutions. Real reparations must be fought for, prepared for, taken, and ultimately secured through our own efforts and the building of our people's power. As Professor Chimwezu reminds us, reparations is not just about money. It is mostly about making repairs, self-made repairs on ourselves. Our infrastructure for reparatory justice preparation begins at the most intimate level and extends to international mechanisms. So I'm now going to share with you some of the different mechanisms that the Stop the Maangamizi campaign is championing. Firstly, the Maatzoedzaduaras, which are the foundation, and we spoke about the Maatzoedzaduaras in episode 2. At the base are these Maatzoedzaduaras, which are Maat action learning circles, where families and communities document their experiences of the Maangamizi. As a recap, these circles serve multiple functions. They document family and community histories. They analyze patterns of harm across generations. They develop a collective understanding of how these experiences connect to broader structures of dispossession, dehumanization, and disempowerment. They also help heal intergenerational trauma through active truth-telling. Secondly, part of our infrastructure for reparatory justice preparation, as championed by the Stop the Maangamizi campaign, are the Pan-African Reparations Rebellion groundings, or the PARGs. The PARGs are where the Maatzoedzaduaras connect with each other. At the PARGs, the documentation from multiple circles are compared to identify patterns across different families and communities, analysed to develop deeper understanding of systemic issues. They are connected to legal and policy frameworks and their applications, and can be transformed into strategic demands. Third, the Stop the Maangamizi campaign champions the People's Assemblies on African Reparations. The evidence and analyses developed through the Maatzoedzaduaras and the PARGs, that is the Pan-African Reparations Rebellion groundings, then flow into People's Assemblies to articulate collective demands based on our documentation gathered, to develop comprehensive strategies for effecting and securing holistic reparatory justice, build broader coalitions with allied movements, and prepare evidence for presentation to formal bodies like the APSITAJ, the All-Party Parliamentary Commission of Inquiry for Truth and Reparatory Justice, which is the fourth mechanism promoted by the Stop the Maangamizi campaign. The APSITAJ is not yet established. It is a goal that we in the Stop the Maangamizi campaign are working towards through grassroots organising. When established, it would represent the revolutionary use of reform, using establishment institutions to achieve our revolutionary community objectives, African heritage community objectives. By presenting our documentation through official channels like the proposed APSITAJ, we create a platform for the public dissemination of evidence as part of the battle to win hearts and minds, which is very important. The fifth mechanism is the Ubuntu Gotla People's International Tribunal for Global Justice. Like the APSITAJ, the Ubuntu Gotla People's International Tribunal for Global Justice is an institution that the Stop the Maangamizi campaign is working to establish and build the political will for. While we engage with parliamentary structures, the Ubuntu Gotla represents our parallel effort to reclaim African legal sovereignty. What makes this infrastructure revolutionary is that it will maintain community control at every level. The flow from the Maatzoedzaduaras to the APSITAJ and the Ubuntu Gotla will ensure that 1. Our evidence comes from our lived experiences, not from academic abstractions. 2. Our analysis emerges from collective knowledge production, not from experts speaking for us that are outside of us. 3. Our demands reflect our community priorities, not institutional agendas. And 4th, our strategies combine grassroots action with critical institutional engagement. This is the essence of Yɛresiesie Yɛn. We are preparing ourselves, not waiting for reparations to be given, but building the power to demand, effect, and secure repair on our terms. Now for our call to action. As we conclude today's episode, we want to remind you of our core message. Preparation for reparations. Yɛresiesie Yɛn. We are preparing ourselves. Reparations or repair requires our active engagement, our strategic organization, and our collective power building. Here are some concrete actions that you can take to become powerful witnesses in this process. Firstly, you can begin documenting your own story. Start where you are. Record your own experiences of the Maangamizi, how it has affected you, your family, your community. Your personal testimony is a powerful form of evidence. Secondly, go on to gather family histories, talk with elders and family members, record their stories with their permission, of course, collect family documents and photographs, and create a record of your family's experiences across generations. Third, establish or join a Maatzoedzaduaras. Form a Maat Action Learning Circle where you can share your documentation with others. You can analyze patterns together and you can build a collective understanding of the Maangamizi and its impacts. Fourth, connect your witnessing to collective action. Bring your testimonies and evidence to Pan-African Reparations Rebellion groundings, or even the People's Assemblies on African Reparations, where individual witnesses become collective power building in action. Fifthly, you can support formal mechanisms for truth and justice, such as signing and sharing the Stop the Maangamizi petition to support the establishment of the APSITAJ, the All-Party Parliamentary Commission of Inquiry for Truth and Reparatory Justice. Or how about sending off our template letter to your MP that also includes the same demand? You can also support the building of the Ubuntu Gotla People's International Tribunal for Global Justice as an emerging, repaired, formal legal mechanism that will judge the crimes of the Maangamizi according to our people's law. Remember James Baldwin's words. The victim who is able to articulate the situation of the victim has ceased to be a victim. He or she has become a threat. When you document your experiences and bear witness to the truth, you transform yourself from a victim or somebody who has been victimized by the Maangamizi into a powerful agent of transformative reparatory justice change. We would love to hear from you. What topics would you like us to explore in future episodes of this Preparation for Reparations podcast? What questions do you have about documenting your experiences? What stories are you already preserving in your families and communities? Your feedback will directly shape upcoming episodes, so please share your suggestions through our website www.stopthemaangamizi.com, social media channels, or you can email us at stopthemaangamizi@gmail.com. This podcast is designed to support the empowerment of our communities, and your voice matters in determining what we discuss and how we approach these vital conversations of engaging in the process of reparations or repair. Share your journey of witness with us through the Stop the Maangamizi campaign, or indeed the Maangamizi Educational Trust. Together, our collective testimony is building not just our individual and family and people's case for reparations, but also the power to secure it. Thank you for joining me today. Remember that documentation is revolutionary when it serves our collective liberation. Our truths, carefully preserved and strategically presented, become powerful tools for transformation. In our next episode, we'll explore movement capture and counterinsurgency, protecting our reparations cause. We'll examine how powerful interests attempt to co-opt, dilute, and neutralize grassroots reparations movements. We'll discuss the tactics used in movement capture and how communities can protect their autonomy and the integrity of their demands. This is Esther Xosei on behalf of the Maangamizi Educational Trust, reminding you that when we document our truths and build our evidence, we are practicing Yɛresiesie Yɛn. We are preparing ourselves for the justice our communities deserve, not as a final event or destination, but as a process. Thanks to Brother Daniel Kofi, our technical assistant, for all of your support today.